All right. Hey, everybody. It's Jeremy from jeremy.net. I'm a comic book artist, writer, creator, self-publisher, and I share my creative process here with you online. If you enjoy this channel, would like to get additional bonus live streams twice a month, you can become a Patreon subscriber for as little as $2 a month. Head on over to patreon.com/Jeremy. It's patreon.com/GERIMI. If you'd like to get a free digital sketchbook, work in progress animated GIFs, blog posts about what I'm reading, what I'm watching, what's inspiring me creatively, you can sign up for my free monthly newsletter at newsletter.jeremy.net. And if you'd like to purchase physical copies of my comic books or if you read digitally on Kindle, you can go to amazon.jeremy.net. I'll forward you to my Amazon author page. You can pick up my books. And today we have special guest in the house, indie comics creator, powerhouse, and friend of the show, Pate. Paul, welcome to the
series. Yeah, I'm honored. I usually look forward to hearing you talk constantly. Now I feel like I'm interrupting.
Well, that's kind of the nice thing about the conversations that I get to have with people, my fellow creators, is that it really does feel like we're just having a conversation about, the art and the process. And I figure, whenever, we're talking with like-minded friends, like at a certain point, I'm like, I gotta get you on just to hang out and talk.
Yeah.
And I remember when I started specifically seeing your comics popping up on my Instagram feed, and I was like, these are really good. Like, you really capture in like the 3 panels per post that you were doing of your Detective Perez series. Like each post really felt tight and compact. It moved the story along. It had great dialogue and it had great art. And it's like, you're packing so much into such a tight space. It's like a really great flavored pastry, it's dense flavor.
Wow, I feel like I'm getting my money's worth on the check I sent you. Thanks, Jeremy. I really appreciate that. It means a lot coming from you, because I know it's one of the things I appreciate about your show is just the thoughtfulness that you put into every drawing. And there's a ton of these streams out there, artists, but I've been thinking about like, why do you get drawn into certain ones that you like? And just like your depth, your level of, you go into the thinking behind the technique, the practice, and that's the stuff that I enjoy because it helps me build mine, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I'm like, okay, I'm thinking of those things, but you're verbalizing them and putting them down into your art, and then I can take that and go, oh, that applies to mine as well. So that's why I think your show is one of the ones where I connect with it, So yeah, it's good.
Well, dude, I'm happy to hear that and flattered to hear you say that. Oh, wait, for a minute I saw something in the chat. Somebody's Dan was in the chat, said he's not seen the live stream, but then he says he can see it now. So I'm glad that he popped in there.
And so Dan is actually a friend of mine, and I was telling him about we were coming on the show today, and we were having a conversation about something completely different, and I was like, oh, I'm going to mention that on the show that I'm on with Jeremy this afternoon because it really applies. And so the quote is basically like, you learn to ice skate during the summer, and you learn to bike during the winter.
Cross training.
Well, what he was telling me, that there's more to it than that. It's from some psychologist. But what it is you practice, and then you go away and you learn. When you come back the next season, now you've learned new things, and you try it again, and you've leveled up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think your show is a lot like that. A lot of times you're talking about, I'm practicing these figure drawings, I'm practicing these techniques, and it's about the practice. But then the learning happens when you go away and you come back. to it. And the next time you're like, oh, I was telling him, I had taken a figure drawing class one time for like 6 weeks, 3-hour sessions of, doing the quick gestures, and then you get into 5 minutes and the poses.
Get some light tones, some longer poses.
Yeah, but doing this for 6 weeks, and it was challenging, but it was really rewarding. At the end of it, I started to draw some comics and realized I could draw hands. And I was like, I learned how to draw hands during that figure drawing class and didn't even really realize it because of all the large gestures and the shapes and forms, things like, you know what I mean? So, anyway.
But I mean, it's funny that you say that, because what changed for me is I started taking figure drawing classes. Like, I've been doing it pretty consistently for over a decade now. But when I started, it was when I was working on my first graphic novel and I was struggling. And I thought, some friends of mine were taking a class at a local place in LA. And I thought, I haven't taken figure drawing classes in a long time. Maybe it'll help me. And so I went in with it just saying wanting to make better comics. Right. Just improve my drawing there. But kind of the stuff that you talked about in terms of like, I understand hands better. I started realizing that there were all these different layers of organizing information that just drawing a single figure in different poses would help me in terms of thinking of that the same way you would compose a comic book page. Like, your brain just has to organize things and decide what to emphasize, what to de-emphasize. And it has to decide what to put in and what to leave out, even if it's there, because you'll see things, your mind may say, this detail should be here. Like, even just a background. You might say, this character should be standing behind an abstract painting because they're in a scene in a museum. But if that abstract painting background is going to make the panel too complicated, or just make that panel stand out on the page when you don't want it to, you're like, that's got to go. Yeah. And figure drawing, I realized it just helped my whole process of organizing things. And then I realized also, after I think I took the class twice in a row, I was like, this isn't something I just learned one time and I know. It's literally like, I always say it's like lifting weights. The more you do it, the stronger you get. The less you do it, the weaker you get. But there's no point when you're done. You're never done.
Yep. And, isn't that the truth?
So, I mean, I'm glad that you got that vibe. And that's also the thing that I always try to bring to what I'm doing is just that, the studying never stops for me anyways.
No, it doesn't for anybody. If it does, they're lying.
Let's see. By the way, Byron is in the chat, and he had some nice things to say. And he said that, he said it's true. Jeremy's thoughtfulness and openness to the craft, being an avid learner is a big draw. Which I don't know why I don't want to give Byron the short shrift on him saying nice things about me, but I also am like, I don't really need to blow myself up. Now I'm starting to blush a bit. But he says now Dan says, thus we notice after exercising our muscles or our brain in a new way that we can do so no longer at that time, but after a day or two of rest, we resume the discipline with our increased skill. Now, your buddy Dan, very thoughtful and analytical there. Is he also, Dan, are you also a writer, artist, multi-hyphenate creator?
I'm going to let him answer that.
Okay, let's see. He says, I've often noticed this in learning a tune, and it has led to it has led a German author to say that we learn to swim. Oh, there we go. We learn to swim during the winter and skate during the summer.
Oh, yes. Okay, so these two comments from him, he's quoting the psychologist William James, I think. So that's not Dan.
German author.
Yeah.
So cool. Oh, there we go. Awesome. Okay. Philosopher. Nice. Yeah. Well, I can tell, Dan, you and I would get on like Cracker Jacks because you're very analytical about things. Which, I mean, for me, if anything, it's harder to stop analyzing or reduce the analyzing and say, all right, let me just move into action. I mean, speaking of action, so you've done 3 volumes of Detective Perez, right?
Yes, sir.
Have you always been a fan of pulp and crime stories, or when you decided this was something that you wanted to put your time and energy into, how did that come about?
Yeah. Okay. So here's my origin story. I was in college and I was struggling, and I thought I better quit before I get kicked out, because if you get kicked out, you can't go back.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, I got to quit so that I can come back. I took off college and lived in Flint, Michigan for 2 years. And that was at the time where I realized I was really interested in fiction, stories, movies. A great quote from Walter Mosley, the author, the noir author. He says, to write fiction is harder than to write nonfiction. It's got to be more true. And I love that. I love that quote. So, there's a lot I just think fiction is great. So that was when I became interested I loved this TV show, Homicide: Life on the Street, at the time. The same people who made The Wire.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Right. So I love that. I love Law and Order. And then starting to try to write, I'm like, I can't do the Born Identity guy.
Mm-hmm.
What's his name? Robert Ludlum. Yeah, yes. I can't do it. I can't do James Patterson. I love those guys, I can't even do Walter Mosley.
Mm-hmm. Well, Walter Mosley would be hard to do.
Yeah, but I love Walter Mosley. I'm not going to tell you that I can sit here and do Dashiell Hammett.
Mm-hmm.
The
kind
real,
of pulpy, punchy.
Yeah, the real short. But I felt like I could try it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll mix up all that stuff, and that's where Detective Perez came. But to do the first book, I mean, not to come up with the first story. Mm-hmm. It took me years to finally to get into a place in life where I could do it, to get into I felt like I had a level of maturity and imagination. I mean, it took me decades.
Oh, yeah.
So it was about 2011 when I completed my first book. 2014 was my second book. 2024 was my third. So
that's a great pace. You're running along.
I know. For those that don't do graphic novels, you may think 10 years. Well, what were you doing? But
see, that's the thing. Because honestly, my theory was I'd publish a graphic novel every year for 5 years. And then when I had 5 graphic novels done, I'd have enough of a back catalog that maybe I could eke out a living selling my backlist and then just keep producing books, and I could make it my full-time job. The problem is that the first one is infinitely harder than you think it's going to be. Yep. It takes longer. Yep. Then when you go to the second one, you've learned so much from the first one that you are faster, but you're also more ambitious because you've done the first book and you're like, oh,
yes.
The chessboard is open up for me now. I can see so much more that I can do. And then you do the second one, and then you're like, well, now I want to raise the level of my craft. I want this to be just above and beyond. So now you're slowing down because you want the work to be better. And that's that's kind of where I am.
It's in your nature. It's just in your nature to bite off more than you can chew.
You always want your jaws aching. Now,
that's right.
I see an interesting question here. So Red is in the chat, and Red asks, did you ever apply to work at Marvel or DC?
Okay, that's a great question, because back when I was telling you my origin story, what happened was I never paid attention to comics growing up. I knew about them, but I never paid attention to them. I always liked to draw. I like to draw portraits, sports figures, and things like that. When I moved to Flint, I had a roommate that had this big comic book collection, and I was like, "Oh wow, this is amazing! The artwork is great. I mean, some of it's like cartoony, but when you start looking at it deeper, it's like, well, this is just fantastic artwork, and the stories are so imaginative, and it's all on this little comic book. It's this, you can have any kind of story. You know, you don't need, you can go to outer space. You can go back in time. You can visit the dinosaur age all the way to the future. You know what I mean? You don't need a special effects crew, but you can do anything you want. This is fantastic, and I love it. And so I started trying to draw these Marvel characters, you know, X-Men, Spider-Man, and that my friend, his collection, he loved Marvel. He loved the X-Men and all and stories, you know, just X-Men, where I was just enthralled by this. So I learned about you know, what you have to do to become one of these artists, a penciler for Marvel. You know, submit your big splash page, 8-page submission, you know. And after working on that for a while, I realized this is not for me. Just to become this one little cog in the wheel of making this bigger story. I think I want to, it's just not for me. I want to do all of it. You know, I want to come up with a story. I want to draw it. And so the writer illustrator path appealed to me more. So, and long answer, no. I certainly thought about it, and I can honestly tell you, if I wanted to, I think I would still be working on it today. You know, all these years later, I would still be practicing and trying to submit, and probably wouldn't get in. You know.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I look at like the level of stuff that are in mainstream comics now, and the level of detail, like. People seem to get really pissed off that artists don't do long runs on books anymore. But you look at it and like each issue is like the Sistine Chapel. You're not even get 3 of those out a year. I'm
right.
I'm like, they're killing themselves. These people
and
18 hours a day.
I know. You know? And you know what's crazy is I love this independent comic book craze, Kickstarter and everything. You know, and Morningstar, I get to buy your comic. Get to read it, and I get to interact with the author. You know, it's incredible. But there is such a glut of fantastic artwork, writing, story, imagination. And I'm not using the word glut in a bad way.
Yeah, there's a wealth. We're drowning in great comics, which is a first world problem, but it does make it hard to get an audience for your stuff.
Yeah. Yep. So, So anyway. Yeah, there's the detail, the level of the artwork that go. Yeah, the Sistine Chapel is a good analogy, I think, because I mean, McFarlane ruined it for everybody back when he started working, you know, and it was like he set the standard, you know, back then, and everybody just kept ratcheting it up, you know. And
he was smart. He started getting like other artists like, I'll just come in and ink you. You know, come in, do the fun stuff. And I mean, and I like finishing drawing. Like the more I've been doing this, the looser my pencils have gotten, and I do more of my work in the inks, because it's like, it's not even the why draw it twice thing. It's for me personally, it's simply that I am a loose, rough artist anyway. So I find that when I do pencil tightly, I just end up just screwing it all up in the inks anyway. So it's easier to do a rough sketch and then clean it up in the inks. It just, you know, everyone's process is different in how we work through stuff. So
yeah, for sure. I do the real loose pencils, and I do ascribe to the why draw it twice to a certain extent, you know, but because, you know, I know what I'm looking for, so I can ink. But my favorite process is the inking process. The pencils is kind of hard.
I was going to say, I saw another comment there from Byron. He says there's a lot more buy-in when it comes to fiction, fantasy, and sci-fi, especially since you have to work harder to make it believable than you would in nonfiction. You know, in terms of the quote, you were saying. I mean, also, I think it's the fact that when it comes to believable, I think that I agree with what Byron's saying, but I think that it's almost more of like that that philosophical idea of telling the truth, because the truth are not the fact. The truth is what feels emotionally honest, what feels convincing, when you can understand a character's motivations, and when they say a line of dialogue that they might be talking about like dragons and, you know, burning a city down, but they'll use a metaphor that we can all understand for someone's life crumbling or falling in love or just having the worst day of your life, and use a metaphor that's like, it might be completely ridiculous, completely fantastical, but it's true.
Yeah.
And that's the thing when Byron says believable, that's what I interpret that in terms of the whole idea of writing fiction versus nonfiction, is that emotional truth.
Yeah. And that was the word that Walter Mosley used, was truth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he says,
it's funny because I've only read a handful of Mosley. I want to read his entire catalog, but it's one of those things where I obviously read Devil in a Blue Dress because it just was like his one of his most famous books. I read like a couple of short stories, and oddly enough, there was like a non-crime novel that he wrote that was just about a guy living in his family basement trying to like keep that family home after his family passed away.
Yeah, he's getting a little dark in his older age. But yeah.
Although also I haven't watched any of the Star Trek because I know that they brought him in for a very brief period to show around one of the new Star Trek. Yeah, he was working on one of the new Star Trek series, and I guess he butted heads with a lot of the younger writers. And so I think by mutual agreement, he left the show. But I know that he does not suffer fools.
No, it doesn't seem like he would.
But also the fact that he's a huge genre fan, that he loves sci-fi and fantasy and comics, even though he doesn't do a ton of it. But it was really like, just when I saw that he was working on it, I just thought it was cool because I'm like, you wouldn't have thought it?
Yeah, I would not think.
But I was like, damn, that's just really cool.
Was it you that was telling me that he was did some run on comics recently? Was that
it may have come up in the chats because I mean, honestly, I can't remember what I said yesterday. But I know that he has written some comics in the past. But I don't know if he's doing anything. It's somebody else. It might have been somebody else. Because I mean, that's the other thing. When you have enough like creative friends that you listen to and talk to, you're trying to remember, is this somebody that I was talking to in person? Was this somebody on live stream that I was listening to with people that I know? Like they had I saw the other night the Artcasters had a retreat, and I was listening to it, and it's kind of like, it's so crazy. Because, like, again, people that you've had a chance to hang out with in person, so when you're sitting there listening to talking to them, it feels like you're just in the like when you're in a room with a bunch of people having a conversation, but you're in a creative zone, so you can just sit there and draw, and you don't necessarily participate. You just enjoy being in the room.
There's a few different things, because when you're in the zone drawing, you're like absorbing it, but not consciously.
Yeah.
And then there's another thing that happens with me. I don't know if this happens to you, but a lot of times late at night, especially with the Artcasters, it comes on late for me. So I'll watch it and I'll be going, okay, I'm falling asleep, guys, later. And I absorb some of it, but I don't remember it, But then the conversations come up in your subconscious, and you're like, oh, when did I talk about this?
No, definitely. It's the same thing of just having those voices in your head in a positive way.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So, I was going to ask you though. So I was mostly reading Detective Perez, like I said, on Instagram, and I was just stunned at how much you got into each page and made each page feel like a satisfying, like, creative bite. I never bothered to check if you were posting it other places online, because I know that once you completed it, you moved on to the children's book project you're working on. And before we get into that, I was just curious about how much of your way of getting your books out in social media was sort of a thought out plan versus just make it, throw it on Instagram, and we'll figure it out later and package it. How much planning?
So actually, it was Jim Lujan that suggested I do that. I mean, I had kind of thought about it before in different ways of doing it, serializing it basically. But Instagram is great for that, and I was just like, yeah, Jim, that's a great idea, and Instagram is perfect for it. And so I just went for it. And it was just, it worked out nice, because I could tell you the first one, it was like down in the dungeon, head down, hours by myself, no social interaction, no feedback, You're just, it was like climbing the mountain by yourself, and you don't know when you're going to get there. You don't know how you're doing. You just climb. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And whereas this third one it was so different because I had the Saturday morning cartoons where I would draw and people would hang out and chat, and I wasn't very efficient those days, but that was fine. That's part of it, but just the social, the feedback. I got some ideas for pages, from people on the stream. And that's so fun, and then just posting it on Instagram and getting feedback, just to feed my ego enough to keep me going. So this experience has been a lot nicer. It's been a lot more pleasant this third one than the first two.
Yeah.
For that, you know what I mean? I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it makes complete sense. I mean, for me, the whole reason why I even started a YouTube channel was because I realized in the amount of time it takes to put out just a single issue, people will forget about you in, say, a year, or if they only see me at one convention a year. Prior to that, I was doing comic conventions, but if they only see you once a year, or if you only have something new every couple of years, then it's like they may just forget about me. And that whole idea of if someone took the time to buy something that I made and they enjoyed it, it's almost like I don't want them to think that I forgot about them as a reader. I'm grateful that they took the time for that. So I thought, let me just show what I'm working on every week. That was the start of it, was just stay out there, keep people informed that yes, I might be working in tiny bits and increments, which is honestly why the past couple of years since I finished Morningstar has been so frustrating, because I knew while I was finishing up Morningstar that I should be writing the next project so that when I finished it, I'd be ready to go.
Right.
But I was in such a hurry because it had taken me so long to do this series that I put all of my time into finishing the last issue and putting together the trade instead of saying, I'm going to go slower, but when I'm done, I'll have the new thing. So now I've been writing and rewriting the new thing. And to be honest, I think if I had been drawing pages while I was writing the next thing, I would be less precious about it. Because when you're drawing pages, you know how it is. You're just like, your brain's like, go, go, go with the physical process. And it's like, it's both challenging, but automatic. You don't have to deconstruct stuff. If something's not working on the page, then it's very simply, all right, do I need reference to get this? Do I just need to move the panels over? Do I need to jump? Your tools for repairing a broken comic page are a lot more concrete than your tools to repair a broken story.
Right. Yeah. For me, the list goes like this. Writing is the worst. I can't do it. It's my least favorite. Penciling, constructing that page, the panels, that takes some brain power. The inking, that's fun. It's like you're bringing it to life. You know what I mean? That's to me the performance part of it. And then you do the letters. That's just clean up and makes it makes it production ready. I guess I forgot to mention coloring because even though mine's in black and white gray tones, coloring is part of it. That's kind of tedious. I don't know what you think. Maybe because I only do black and white.
No, I prefer doing black and white because I think that my sense of color. My wife actually was commenting that I was doing a sketch for a piece for her, and I showed her the colors digitally, and she was like, "Oh my God, you have such a great sense of color." And I looked at her like she was an alien, because you know how it is. It's hard when somebody pays a compliment to you that is something you feel like is one of your artistic weaknesses.
Right. Yeah.
It's like you want to just shut up and say thank you, but at the same time you're like, no.
Yeah.
I like a lot of the black and white comics. First off, as a quick side, Red in the chat just
I don't know what to think of this.
Like if Frank Miller, if he was a buff or tall guy, that's good look. That's a good compliment there. I'd take that. But for
thanks,
instance,
Red. I think.
Like Sin City with Frank Miller, or with Howard Chaykin with Black. I don't know if you've ever read Black Kiss. It was his it was a first comics kind of an erotic vampire horror story.
Oh wow!
Lots of sex, lots of violence. It was definitely.
Surprised I haven't read it yet.
Yeah, it's definitely an 18 and up. It is a mature, like it would fit in just fine in Penthouse Comics.
Oh wow!
It's very, very raw in terms of the sex, but it's still, there's lots of violence and horror in it. It's a great book. But my favorite comics tended to be black and white. So it was one of those things where doing black and white comics is kind of a no-brainer for me, in that
right.
It's both, if my strengths are more in terms of black and white and composition and value, and there's stuff that I enjoy. It's not that I'm against doing color comics. There's also the fact that they're cheaper to print.
Yeah.
When you're doing indie, you got to do it that way. And I always kind of told myself, I could look at the Jeff Smith, Steve Hammaker collaboration, and if in some universe my books were wildly successful, then I could afford to do a reprint run and hire a colorist and properly pay them to go back and recolor my work. And that's just sort of the way I look at it, is that I'm not against my work.
I've seen that done. Yeah, I was actually just I've seen that done.
Yeah, I figure I could just go back and do it someday. Like, I mean,
oh, sorry.
Oh no, I thought you were going to show it. Yeah, let me see.
No, this is Path of the Pale, right? Path. Sometimes I call it Pale of the Path Rider. Path of the Pale Rider.
Is it a European album?
No, this is a comic.
Oh, okay, cool.
It's a zombie comic, and they did their first issue in black and white, and then they went back and colored it when they came out with their trade. You know, like first 5 or something, they came out with now it's all color. I mean, because I think they were kind of getting some momentum and success. You know,
got some nice pushback, or not pushback, but some support from people. No, that's good.
Yeah, it's kind of just like what you're talking about.
Yeah, but no, I don't find gray toning tedious. I enjoy it, but it feels like rendering for rendering's sake. Like when you're putting in more hatching, like all of this is just. In fact, when I first started doing Morningstar, originally I did the first 3 issues where it was black and white with no gray tones. It was just the line art.
I remember. I'm sorry. You go ahead.
But when I got to issue 4, I did this technique where half of the issue is in flashbacks, and I realized that the first half of the story was all action. The flashback was all action. The part in the present was all sort of character development. And I felt that it made the structure of the issue very boring. So what I decided to do was intercut it so that a spread, would be set in the present. Then you turn the page, the next spread is set in the past. Then you turn the page, next spread is in the present. And it just goes that way for the whole issue. And when I did that, I realized I needed gray tones in order to really make it visually apparent which section you were in. If I just did it all in black and white, it just would have been too hard. Yeah. And once I did that, I was like, oh, well, now I have to go back and add gray tones to the first 3 issues for the trade. And I was just like, oh, let's go with that. So, but no.
Did you find that to be fun? I mean,
it's fun. But I'm still kind of on the fence because I look at other people. For instance, I'm a big fan of this artist Jim Haldaway, and he's a British artist, and he passed away years ago. But he was the first artist on the British crime comic strip Modesty Blaze.
Oh, okay.
And I had heard about Modesty Blaze over the years, and I know that they've gone through I think 5 different artists. The writer, Peter O'Donnell, I think is still alive, but I think he's in his 80s now. So they're not making new comics of that. But it was a British strip that ran in British newspapers. And this was in the 60s when it started. And I'm reading this, and I'm like, there's dope fiends and human trafficking and all kinds of crazy shit. And I'm like, this was in the newspaper?
Yeah, wow, that's awesome. This is and I think, listen, Jeremy, I think everybody in the chat will agree with me on this. You have a professor level knowledge of comics and artists. At least 3 or 4 times on every show you mention artists that I've never heard of. that I could go, look it up.
Well, I mean, I'm glad that you. I mean, for me, I almost feel like my problem is that I read too widely because they say that one of the best things to do is to just figure out what you really love and then do that. If you read a ton of fantasy and you know fantasy really well, do fantasy. If it's crime, if it's sci-fi, whatever it is. But I'm an omnivore when it comes to comics and literature in general. I like crime, I like fantasy, I like science fiction, I like pulp. I like biography. I'm a curious human being, and I like hearing a variety of stories. And to be honest, I've even thought about reading some romance novels just to get a better sense of internal development and emotional development. Because you may not think about it, but if you put a story if you put something that has a strong emotional core that people resonate with, you wrap that in something like science fiction, you get something like Saga.
Which is great.
Yeah, you can take these things. Like for me, I remember the first time that I actually was aware of romance in genre was that old Ron Howard movie with Val Kilmer, Willow.
Oh yeah.
Because it was that whole thing of like, Val Kilmer's character, there's this woman trying to kill him, and he ends up drinking a love potion and falls in love with her, and he's just like wooing her the whole time, and she's just like trying to kill him. And then eventually the fight ends, and he gets dragged away, and her heart starts to soften a little bit. She's kind of like, I've never had anyone be that passionate about me because I'm like this badass warrior woman, and this guy kind of touched me a little bit. And then when they meet again, the potion's worn off. He doesn't even remember her. And she was like coming at him, kind of like, hey, so what's going on? And he's just like, yeah. And now she's pissed because now she feels like she's been spurned, and just that whole back and forth. And it's like, I can see how that emotional relationship to me stands out more than anything else that happened with the actual, whatever Warwick Davis's character was. I can't remember him and the baby and all of that, which was supposed to be the heart of the story. I didn't care a damn about that.
Well, they say when you meet somebody, you may not remember a conversation that you had. You remember the feeling that you left with. And I think that's how I remember stories.
Yeah.
I don't remember details of some of my favorite movies. I can't remember the details, but I remember the feeling that I came away with in that movie.
Yeah.
So I think that you're onto something there.
Well, that's an interesting question. Well, what pops in my mind when you say that, it actually makes me think about wanted to ask you about your writing process, only framing it in that a lot of times when I'm outlining, the way my outline process will be is that I'll break, the story down into acts. And as I'm doing it, I'll think about how do I want the reader to feel at this point of the story? How do I want them to feel on this page? Do I want them to be happy, angry, confused, frustrated? And it's almost like I build the emotional arc of the story first, and then I move the plot points around. And like the dialogue is almost the last. The dialogue is like the inking. It's the fun stuff. It's on the surface. It's what people see.
Yeah.
It's not the emotional narrative is sort of like the architecture. And that's the thing that is, like you said, that is the absolute heavy lifting. And let me put it this way. I don't loathe writing. I don't hate it, but it is absolutely the most challenging part of it for me.
Right.
But I say that because I have decided from now on, I'm not doing what I did in the past, which was finish the last book, start writing the next. Because if you only write every 5 years, it's always gonna be like starting over.
Well, that's the thing. I've written 3 graphic novels, but I've drawn over 600 pages.
Yeah,
I've drawn Detective Prez probably 1,000 times. I'm perfectly comfortable with my drawing process and confident. With my writing though, I've only written 3. So I think what I've been thinking about for my next project is, hey Dylan, good to see you.
Hey Dylan, thanks for dropping in. Good to see you.
And Byron and Red and Dan and everybody in the chat.
And we were talking about comics. Red also had mentioned Corto Maltese, which I have not read, but I've heard great things about Corto Maltese, so I do need to check that out too as well.
Cool.
But yes, writing.
Yeah, so I'm thinking my next project, I want to write a few different things
Mm-hmm.
and then pick from them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I have a couple of ideas. For me, writing is excruciating. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I love it. I'm always thinking about it. You know, when I say it, you know, I don't really hate it. I wouldn't do it if I hated it. But you know, it's challenging, like you said.
Yes.
But I want to write a few different things and go, okay, uh, I like this one. Maybe I'll work on this one and then refine it and make it better. And
Mm-hmm.
then when I find something I like, then dive in and, go through the process of turning it into a book. But yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking. I'm sort of at a crossroads, after my third Detective Perez. I don't want to do Detective Perez anymore. I want to
put them on the shelf for a while, maybe retirement, but just you've left him in a good place for now.
Yeah, maybe he can make a cameo, so
Yeah, I mean, and honestly, because I don't tend to think of things like, I don't think of a character that I would just want to do for 100 issues. I think more like Stephen King, where they can all exist in the same world, and if you have a character who's the main character in one story, they can be like a minor character in the other. Like if you come up with a detective, and then you're doing another story in which a detective appears, why have to come up with a new character? You just
right. I do love the world of Rust City.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely want to continue in that world, but that character, I think, his arc is good for now. So,
well, how often do you write? And I mean, do you have a discipline about it, or is it just sort of like when you're ready for it, you can take it out? No.
Yes, I'm sorry. It's not a good situation, Jeremy. I mean, literally, I got done with this cartoon, the animated film Samurai Tai, late 22, and decided, okay, my next project is going to be another Detective Perez book. And I've been thinking to all these different stories, but I haven't written anything down. I stopped what I was doing and spent a couple of months writing it, and I wrote out the whole story. And it was, lots of stops and starts and finishes and throw that away. And, it took me quite a while. And finally got it done, but I sat down to write it. You know what I mean? It's not like a continuous practice like I have with drawing. I mean, I'm confident with my process with drawing. I'm confident in my practice. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, definitely.
I do the things, I can do the things that I know are part of my practice, that keeps the skills up. And then when it comes time to sit down and grind, I know how to do that, But the writing thing, I can't tell you, I can't look you in the eye and tell you that I know what I'm doing there. So, well, I mean, I like what I've come up with, and I think there's a lot of room for improvement. Of course, we all do. But yeah, there's things I know that I can do to be more sophisticated with it. So.
Well, what I was going to throw in there is that what keeps me from throwing myself off a bridge is knowing that the level of frustration and difficulty that I feel with writing, I know that I very much had that with the art side early on. And it's only through putting in the hours and the consistency that I can sit down on any given day, and if I have an outline or a script or just a set of actions, that I can sit down and I can make a comic page out of this. Might not be the best page in the world, but it will have at least one good drawing in it.
right.
And it'll be sufficient, I think, to entertain someone for the amount they look at it, which really that's all it needs to do.
Yeah.
And that thing, reason why I was asking about the discipline is because I've been trying to set aside at least 30 minutes every day to write, and I've been failing in doing that. For a variety of work reasons, family reasons, just schedule reasons. And sometimes there's days when I sit down to write and I need to draw for mental health. Like it's literally, that's the one thing. Writing is very, very creative for me.
Yeah.
Art soothes my soul in a way that writing does not.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I know writers for whom the tapping the keys soothes their soul.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I don't know if it's necessarily doing it enough will get me to that place as well, or if doing it enough will make it easier such that I can say, all right, it's just another set of problem solving tools. Like I really try to take the
Yeah.
tools that I've had for learning how to improve as an artist and applying those to writing.
I feel like I know where you're at, and I feel like you're doing the right thing. You know because the mental health part of it is a huge part of it. You're not going to come out with your next project if you don't keep your mentals in check, right? But you gotta have the discipline. You gotta have the flexibility and the practice and all those things. And I feel like I understand the frustration where you're at right now, but I also feel like you're doing the right things to get where you want to go. So, but it's some with this medium and this art, this path that we've chosen, this takes patience. Does it not?
Well, I mean, it's funny. Like I know stand-up comedians often say, if you can do anything else, do it. and it's like comics for me is that thing where somehow, for some idiot reason, as a child, I fell in love with what is arguably one of the most difficult forms of creativity on earth. And the only thing that makes me feel better is a TV show on FX called The Bear.
The
cooking show.
Is that the show about the restaurant?
Yeah.
I've had that recommended to me. Somebody told me you should watch The Bear, and I don't know.
You should, and I'll tell you why. Because it is people doing something incredibly hard, incredibly frustrating, with low levels of appreciation, and the only real gratitude, the only real thanks is the fact of knowing that you made the thing you wanted to make. That it's the only thing I've seen that I'm like, okay, that looks harder than comics. Like all the time, I say no, comics is we have to write, we have to draw, we have to art direct, we have to know architecture, we have to know all these different skills, directing the camera, lighting and cinematography. We have to know all these things to make comics. I'm watching people run a restaurant.
Oh my God.
Like, God damn, that looks like you'll watch an episode of The Bear. Don't watch it if you have heart problems, because you'll be watching it and you'll just be like, oh my God, this is so stressful. This is so hard. This is so crazy. Like
when I went to live in Flint, I worked in like restaurants and bars and nightclubs for a couple of years, and that's kind of that's what I did for work, which made me interested in this underworld, because I didn't live a life of crime. I'm not interested in a life of crime, right? But I won't say I'm not interested in it.
Everyone's interested in it.
Yeah, but we were talking. I was talking with my friend Dan today, and we were talking about like, something like I don't want to have a lunch. I don't want to having a lunch with this bad person would be like having lunch with a bank robber. I don't want to have lunch with a bank robber. And Dan says to me, I think I want to have lunch with a bank robber. I'm like, yeah, I think you're right. That's actually a bad analogy. I do want to have lunch with a bank robber.
I mean, a bank robber. Here's the thing: you don't have anything a bank robber wants because you don't have a bank. I don't want to have lunch with a serial killer, but a bank robber, hell yeah.
That's
anybody
right.
who
right.
It's like
good point.
Like the shadow man who sleeps under someone else's bed. As long as you're not after me. People of all stripes and all different. I think that's part of the thing of being a storyteller of whatever medium is curiosity about other people's inner lives and inner worlds and their outer lives and the crazy stuff that happens to them that would never in a million years happen to us.
Right. I think that's I think both you and I and anybody that's interested in making comics is really what is driving us is the storytelling. And I've started to realize that when I, got out into the world, I'm always telling stories. I can't help it. It's probably, annoying my family with it. It's just, you know, what happened last night? Well, let me tell you this story, you know, and so yeah, I think that's that's what drives us to do this.
You know, I see a question from Red here in the chat. And by the way, guys, whenever I've got a guest on, it's like usually we're talking about stuff that's so interesting, the chat gets the short shrift. So I try to every once in a while throw something in there. But Red was asking, is your story dark or just tamed? And I know what I think, but I'm curious to see how you're going to answer
I hope it's dark. I hope it's dark and untamed. I hope my story is dark and untamed. That's the idea behind it. So
yeah, I mean, it definitely was gritty. And I mean, especially, you know, we got into the parts where Detective Perez was kind of trapped between the woman crime boss and then her man that she's got on the side. He's kind of like almost getting tangled in a little bit of a, like, is this going to lead to a menage? What's going on? Like, it definitely was racy and dark in all the good ways. It felt like a good Spencer novel.
Yeah, that's what I'm going for. So thank you.
Like gritty, but never not fun. It's not that it's funny. It's fun. You're enjoying the ride with these characters. Like, I mean, aside from Spencer, also like Elmore Leonard. Kind of like that. Definitely a rum punch vibe.
Yeah. Thank you. That's what I'm going for. I love Elmore Leonard. I would love to work on a Western, some kind of Western, you know. I know Morning Star is Western, but you know, Elmore Leonard's got these great Westerns that he writes, and I just don't know if I could do it. I made a couple of Western short films, you know, cartoons, but
well, I mean, but
the idea of a graphic novel, Western graphic.
Well, I mean, the fact of the matter is that once you've done a graphic novel, you've pulled multiple times that you can do it. So in terms of, well, I'll tell you this: I did not. When I did Morningstar, it was really more based off of taking the trappings of the West and applying it to, you know, to Paradise Lost.
Yeah.
So I didn't do what most people tell you, which is read your genre, read what's in your genre, and learn like the trappings of the story.
Yeah,
not just the genre need to have.
But, I wouldn't call Morningstar really a Western, even though it's a Western. You know, it's not the overriding message to it. But
if anything, it's like a biblical fantasy dressed up in Western drag. That said, you could take any story.
That's great though,
and make a good Western out of it. I say you should just go for it. I mean, hell, maybe just adapt one of your short films. Although that might, I'm curious if adapting your own work to another medium would feel too much like you've already done it. Particularly with animation.
Like I said, see, what I want to do is write a few different stories. So maybe one of them's a Western. You know, I got a sci-fi idea, but I don't know if I can do that.
Oh, I see an interesting question here in the chat from Sword, and welcome, Sword. Thanks for jumping in here and checking out our conversation. So Paul, he asks, what makes a good storyteller a good storyteller?
Okay, so a beginning, a middle, I'm using my fingers, and an end. I think that's it. I don't know, Jeremy, you tell me. I mean, I don't know, but a beginning, a middle, and an end. This is what used to frustrate me, because I'm a storyteller. So what I'm thinking of, like, I got a story to tell. Like, this thing happened to me last night. I went to this place, and this funny thing happened. And isn't that great? And people listening to it are like, what was the point of that? You know, because there was no ending to it. I set it up. I got a middle. You know, this funny thing happened, but there was no end to it. So you got to have, I think, you got to have a point to the story.
Yes.
Your main character has got to go from A to B. They got to move. You can't just have a character that's, you know, Detective Perez at the beginning and he's cool, and he's Detective Perez at the end and he's still cool, right? Something has to happen to this dude. He's got to go through some stuff, you know, but he's got to do it in the arc of a story, a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Yes.
That's kind of how I think of it.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with all of that. I mean, those are the underpinnings. Literally, when I'm blocked on a story, what I will sit down is I don't care whether it's the whole issue, whether it's a scene, whether it's the page. I'll just write beginning, middle, end, and just like figure that out. Like, how does the story change from the start of this page to the end of that page? And I think what you're talking about is just that a story is about what makes a story is that something has changed. Because I mean, there are stories where the character stays the same, but the world changes around them, like Jack
Okay.
Reacher or something like that.
Yeah,
Or,
yeah, that's
you know,
great.
but still, what you said in terms of like, something has to happen, and you have to care about what happened.
Yeah,
That to
yeah,
me
that's the
is
part I left out too. Is you got to care. I
mhm.
mean, yeah,
I
yeah.
would
When
say,
I'm telling a story about my trip to the bar last night,
mhm.
nobody cares.
Yeah,
You
but
know, I got to draw them in somehow.
well, see, but that's what I was going to say. For me, it's curiosity and connection. Because when you say I went to the bar the other night and then this happened, but when you say that this happened, you say that you know, that a one-legged dwarf in drag was the bartender, and they said, "Hey, I've got something real interesting in the back room. You want to check it out?" Now you've immediately drawn someone in because you're like, the
Yeah.
one-legged dwarf drag queen wants to show me something in the back, and they're not, and it's not, and you're like, okay,
Yeah, that's
someone
great.
who is automatically, just by my description, they're a character. They have become a character just by the fact that how
Yeah.
unique they are and they stand out in the world, and they're like, and the fact that they're luring you, that's where the curiosity comes in because you're just
Uh-huh.
like, what?
Now
What could
you've
be
drawn
next?
me. Now you draw me in. This is great. Uh,
Exactly.
this is great. My friend Dan again.
Mhm.
One time he says, "Oh, here's my friend Jerry. You got to meet this guy's great. You got to meet him. This true. This really happened."
Mhm.
And we walk over. We start. He says, "Hey Jerry, this is Paul. Paul's Jerry. Hey, good to meet you." We're just having a conversation. How's your summer going? Good. Blah blah blah. You got any plans? Something conversation you could have and never remember about, right?
Mhm.
And then Jerry just nonchalantly says, "Yeah, we're actually going on this whitewater rafting trip with my first wife. And then when I get back, we're going on." And I was like, and he keeps talking, and I was like, wait, what? Stop, go back. Your first wife? What are you talking about? You're going. So that's when he. So then the end of this. So this is this a story or not? Because the end of the story is he calls his wife his first wife. Okay. So that's an anecdote.
Mhm.
You got to have something like that to draw you in. But then you got to that I think that's not really a story. That's an anecdote.
Yeah,
That's not really an ending.
it's a joke, but like it's got a
Yeah,
little punchline. It's a little Reader's Digest, little joke in the back.
yeah. But you could take that. That's like the bartender, the dwarf, one-legged
Mhm.
dwarf bartender. Now the middle of the story is what happened in the back room,
Yes,
and then,
yes.
and I come out of there like Bruce Willis from the Pulp Fiction scene, right? That's the end. So you got to have the beginning, the middle, and the end, I think. And
Yeah. Well, see, what's weird now is you told me this is because people all the time, like I've done this on the stream where people have asked about like getting ideas and developing ideas, and I'll say that something like as simple as a side comment like that, like just
Mhm.
bring this conversation about ideas and good storytelling. In my mind, I thought of a whole short, not it would certainly wouldn't make a whole graphic novel, but just a short story, maybe 8 pages. I don't think you could drag it out for an entire issue. But let's say that whole scenario that we had that we were talking about there. So the bartender starts to lead you around back, but then there's an unruly patron standing there, and they start grief with the bartender, and you're the bartender's friend, but the bartender throws you under the bus and it's like, oh, well, that's this guy's problem, and now you're caught into it, and the whole story is like not the Iliad, it's like the Odyssey, like where you're just trying to get home, where the whole story is you're just trying to get to the back room of the bar.
Yeah. Right.
All of these things happen in the room of the bar to keep you from getting to that back room. And at the end of the story, you get thrown out of the bar. You never even find out what was in the back room.
Right.
To me, that right there, that's a whole entire story which you can fill with interesting bar patrons and crazy stuff.
Bars are great settings for a story, right? I mean,
you can have romance, you can have violence, you can have crime, you can have all of that take place in one room.
I'm telling you, Jeremy, that's why when I lived in Flint for 2 years and I worked in bars and restaurants, that was my education. It was amazing. Just the wild world that I lived in.
I always wish that I had a chance to become a bartender, because literally, for what you say, just watching and interacting with humanity on so many different levels.
Yeah.
There was a point when I was out of work and I went to they have those bartending schools they advertise. You can get like the license.
Yeah, mixology or something like that.
Yeah. And I went to one, and then they told me how much it cost. It was something like $1,000 or $1,500. This is like back in like the early 2000s, and I was just like, I'm not gonna pay all that to do this. But they had learned that I was a graphic designer, so and they needed a new website. So they said, well, let's do a trade. All right, so I designed their website.
You just went right past the bartender thing. You just skipped right over it.
Exactly.
That's great.
Well, I mean, but the whole reason I wanted to be a bartender was because I was in between gigs in terms of graphic design and finding a hard time doing that. Otherwise, I probably would have just stayed in my lane. But I thought to myself, this would be, plus I was also in my like early mid-20s. So, hanging out in a bar on my nights and weekends sounded like a good use of my time.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. And I mean, if you can stay out of trouble, that's what I found. It was that, luckily I stayed out of trouble. I mean, luckily I stayed out of trouble. Good fortune. Somebody was watching out for me. Mm-hmm. But it was an education in just people and imagination. I can draw on those people forever till the day I'm done.
Let's see. I see Dylan was asking, and I think we talked about this earlier, about did any of you catch the Artcasters live last night? It was fun. And I did not catch them live, but I was up late drawing, and I saw about an hour after they ended their stream, I saw it. So I thought, I'll listen to it a little bit, and then I'll go to bed, and then I'll listen to the rest today. And I ended up just staying up and drawing, listening to it. So kind of like you said, at a certain point, I was like, why am I still awake?
Yeah. So my wife and I, have you heard of Yachtly Crew band?
No, I have not. Are they like a Motley Crue cover band?
No, it's like soft rock.
Oh, okay.
But they all dress up like ship captains. And anyway, my wife and I went to see them last night. So I got home late and I was up. Usually I'm not up that late, but I caught the very end of Artcasters last night.
Oh, nice.
So, but it turns out they were actually all on my stream yesterday morning. For just a few minutes, they were all waking up in the morning, and that they came on my stream and said hi. So it was, it looks like great fun, hanging out with those guys.
I mean, I just can't imagine. See, the problem for me is not the problem, but definitely hanging out with a bunch of people drinking in the evening. That's fun. Waking up in the morning after I've been drinking, I don't want to be around anybody. I just want to dig a grave and pull the dirt over my head and be like, wake me up when the sun is down again. No darkness. Yeah. Well, so I wanted to ask you a bit about your transition to the children's book that you're working on, because you did say that you've got a couple of the things that you're writing now. Mm-hmm. Was the children's book something that is just in that list, or is that something where you just kind of decided?
I didn't write it.
Oh, okay.
I didn't write it. So somebody else wrote it. It's short. I did page 4 yesterday in less than an hour, or let's say an hour. So the thing is 22 pages. Mm-hmm. So for me, it's a short project, but it's also great because I wanted to explore color. Mm-hmm. Because I haven't done a lot of color. I don't I feel that's my weakness. And just in these 4 pages, what I've done is I've got myself a very limited palette. and I'm trying to work with it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the name of the story is Blue on Blue.
Mm-hmm.
My palette is mostly blue, but I have no green and no red.
Mm-hmm.
So, like I've got the sky and the water and then the hills, but I don't have any green. How do I make those hills be hills? It's a challenge, but I feel like I'm learning something from it.
Mm-hmm.
So that was why I wanted to do this, and it's relaxing. Another thing is, when I'm only drawing it, like I said, I got done with Detective Perez, and I want to take a break, and I did that for a while. What I wanted to do was do a lot of the things that you're doing, like sketching, practicing figures, going out and just drawing people from life.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't been doing it. It's just I'm kind of disappointed in myself, but I'm doing a mental health thing, taking a break.
Yeah, I get it.
So, but this Blue on Blue story it's just relaxing because I'm real loose about it. I'm not trying to be precious with it at all, and it's been fun, and
Mm-hmm.
and I'm only drawing it on the weekends primarily, So that's kind of where I'm at. So I want to get on to writing things and looking forward to my next mountain. Beat myself over the head with this comics thing.
Well, how do you decide whether you want to do an animated project or a comics project?
Yeah, I mean, that's tough. I mean, I don't know about you, Jeremy. I actually wanted to ask you about this, but
Mm-hmm.
we're getting a little bit long in the tooth, and you only have so many things in you.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to choose wisely at some
Mm-hmm.
point. It's not. You start to see that it's not. This is not an end for. I think like someday I'm gonna be this great artist that does whatever, and
Mm-hmm.
at some point you realize that project's probably never going to happen. So what am I going to do? I think you realize that maybe after you've completed a couple,
Oh yes, definitely.
right? And
It definitely.
then you realize, wow, the
Mm-hmm.
effort that went into that, and I'm not as good as I thought I was going to be. All those things come into it, and you just realize what your path is. I think
Mm-hmm.
after you've completed a few. So yeah, to choose is tough because I'm struggling with that right now. I really love working on the cartoons,
Mm-hmm.
but I try to imagine myself halfway through the project.
Mm-hmm.
Am I enjoying it? Where's my love? What do I love about this? Because there's a lot of things about doing a cartoon that are just a royal pain.
Oh yeah.
The main thing is one of the most fun things about it is getting somebody to read your lines. Right?
Mm-hmm.
You write something and then somebody else reads the lines and they bring to it something that you didn't imagine. That's so much fun. Okay. But getting them to send that to you, saving it off, going through the sound editing, putting it in the cartoon, doing the lip syncing. Oh, it's just so much, Whereas if I can work on a comic by myself, I can just heads down. I know what to expect. So I think I'm leaning towards comics
Mm-hmm.
just because there's too much. I mean, it's fun with the cartoons, man, but it's just too much unpredictability to it.
Mm-hmm.
Where I need Zen in my life.
A little bit of peace, a little bit of sanity.
Yeah. So I don't know if that answers the question, but
No, no.
I was curious about what you thought about planning out because I know you're kind of
Mhm.
you're writing your next project.
I'm an over planner because
Mhm.
I mean I think that for a lot of us, I have multiple projects that I've had on the back burner for decades, and it's just like maybe an outline, a page long description, or kind of a
Mhm.
rough treatment of it. But I actually, when I got out of school, I went into graphic design because I couldn't find any work in animation
Oh, okay.
because I was a fine art major.
Mhm.
But I realized that, it was a fine art major in a school that's like fine art, like gallery stuff. you know. So
Which
I
is
was
so
not
bad.
I was becoming a worse artist because they weren't actually concerned about the fundamentals. If anything, the way that I talk about art is the thing that it's not like it was a useless degree, because the way that I talk about art and I think about process and creativity, that is what I learned from art school. Because they couldn't care if you could draw your way out of a paper bag. They were concerned with your ideas and how you expressed them. So that was really my education. But then I realized like the animation program was a graduate program only, but they would let undergrads take sort of like the beginning courses of it. And then when I started taking the animation programs, I'm like, oh, these motherfuckers know how to draw. so I used up the rest of my my electives for like my junior and senior year to just take the animation classes. And then I was trying to get work in animation after I graduated and I couldn't. So I moved into graphic design. But I had started doing a couple of, and there's a few floating out on the internet, like a couple of different animated shorts that I did. And I kind of thought like this was in the era of like flash animation and stuff like Newgrounds and it was something box. I can't remember the name of it, but there was like a couple of different like online platforms that were specifically for flash animators. I thought that's what I'll do. I'll become an indie animator and I'll get a deal with some place and I'll put my work up. And one, a lot of that went away, you know, over time. And two, like even before that's the reality that it wasn't going to become a new movement. Usually what happens, people that do that will eventually get hired by main animation studios and just go into that pipeline anyway.
Do you, does that interest you at all? I mean,
well, it did when I was younger. But in doing animation on my own, I found that the only part of the process I really enjoyed was the storyboarding. Doing the indie animation on my own, doing the dialogue, doing, you know, and again, not that was even before I spent time writing comics. So writing was even harder for me back then. And yes, animation is a far more collaborative process, but I don't think I even had the mindset to be that kind of collaborative until like I could do it now. But back then I was both a control freak and I was somebody who the social anxiety I did not enjoy. The kind of the same thing you're saying now. It's like being able to be heads down and working on your own. It's not a dislike or distaste for your collaborators. It's that solitude. For some people, it is isolating and it's anxiety causing. For other people, it is calming. And I am definitely in the group where being completely isolated and allowed to focus is calming. I like to hear from other creators, but it's almost like I like to be shoulder to shoulder with a group of artists who are all doing their own thing versus being in a room full of artists that are all trying to make one thing. Because I want to.
It's so interesting. Like it sounds like you're introverted, but I know you as this person that's on YouTube talking all the time. You know, it's like, how are you an introvert? But I get it. Yeah, I get it.
Well, the dirty little secret is that I try to treat the entire world like the voices in my head. That's literally it. Is literally because we all have a running. If you're creative, if you make things, you have a running monologue. If you're a composer, maybe that running monologue is all notes and sounds and themes. Maybe it's all dialogue if you're a screenwriter. But whatever it is, we have that thing in our head that just will not shut up. And I realize that if I, instead of letting the social anxiety block me off, if I simply say, all right, I'm just going to open the inside of my head to the world, then it's not really me having to be outgoing. It's not me having to be an entertainer, being this and that. It's just saying within reason, there's definitely, I don't let everything out, but just simply to say, okay, this is the inside of my head and I'm just going to share it with you. It's not like I don't have to be a salesman. I don't have to do this. It's just, this is what's in my head. And then it's like, either you dig it or you don't dig it. And if you don't dig it, that's cool. I ain't mad at you. I'm not everybody's flavor. Right. But yeah, it's just that. But the thing is, like, I made a couple of animated shorts myself, and I found that in the time that it took me to make like a 20-minute short, I'm like, it took a year and a half, and I thought to myself, I could have done I mean, I probably could have done a whole graphic novel back then, but I definitely could have done the whole thing in a single standalone, like one shot or 48-page comic.
Yeah. Yeah.
In the time that took me to do like the last short film that I did. And that's when I said, you know what?
Mhm.
I moved away from comics because I didn't. This goes back to that question that I think Reddit asked earlier about whether you'd ever applied for Marvel or DC or considered it. And for me, if somebody would have taken me, I'd have jumped on it like hotcakes.
Mhm.
But the reason why I didn't is because I looked at the math. And this, when I was in college, it was during the comics implosion of the 90s, the late 90s, post-image bust.
Yeah.
And I looked at that and I said, all right, let's say that Marvel published 100 comics a month, which sometimes, some days now it does feel like they do, but I don't think they've ever really published 100 titles monthly on a regular basis.
Right.
Let's say Marvel did 100 comics, DC did 100 comics, and then you take Image, Dark Horse, and all of the other indie publishers out there and lump them together, and let's see that that's maybe like 300 books a month for the entire industry.
Right.
That's 500 monthly titles. And that's being completely generous because it was maybe half of that. But if I at its best, let's say that there's 500 titles per month. That means that there are 500 jobs for pencilers, 500 jobs for inkers, 500 jobs for letterers, 500 jobs for colorists, 500 jobs for writers. That means it's a job market of 2,500 people. That is
pretty competitive.
It's smaller than the NFL.
Yep. And what you're not getting paid NFL money.
No, you're not.
You know, if you're penciler, you're getting paid good. What are they? I don't know, 100 some. Back then it was 100 some.
But I mean, I've heard articles now of people who've been in the industry for 20 years, and they said that the rates, the opening page rates for pencilers are about the same as it was when they broke into the industry.
Yeah,
which just shows how people are not valuing the creators' work. And just in terms of like, it's not about, oh, we're precious and we're artists and we everyone needs to love what we do. It's just, look, getting a living wage in order to make what you make. And if the thing that you make, if people value a comic the same way they value a burger that they eat at McDonald's, it's like, well, then you got to pay people enough to be able to survive to make those things if you want them in the world.
Yeah, if you want them in the world. Yeah, it's hard. It's a hard thing to, as comic creators. You know, it's a hard thing to wrap your head around. You know, that this is not an industry. It's a hobby.
Well, I mean, it's an industry for some people.
Well, for some people it is, but I mean, you know, I'm not saying it should be. I'm not saying it shouldn't be. I struggle with that. It's like, you know, because what I was talking about earlier, there's so many quality, high quality indie comics that are basically not making any money. You know, they're just as good or not, if not better than Marvel and DC, you know, writing, art, everything. And it's hard to wrap your head around this thing that is so, I don't know, it feels like it's fundamental to our culture. You know, how many movies have come from Marvel and DC, you know, and how many, I mean, there's, you know, Road to Perdition, which was an independent graphic novel that turned into a movie, you know.
I mean, you look at Hellboy, you look at, I mean, there's tons of stuff. I mean, there's even stuff like Heartstoppers. There was like an indie, I think it was like a Webtoons comic, and they made it a series on Netflix.
Yeah. There's so much, but and this is, it's like fundamental, yet we don't value it. It's just hard. I don't know where it's going, or you know what it means. I feel like something's changing. You know, I don't know if it's good or bad. I don't want it to, you know, I mean, I feel like the level of artistry is increasing. That's good. If you devalue it and devalue it, how does that keep, you know, I just don't know where. I'm confused about it. You know what I mean? So anybody that tells me they have the answers for that, I'm like, I don't know if you do, you know, I'm all ears, but it's very confusing to me. So.
No, I think if there was a rational answer for how to get people to value the creative process, and that's the thing. I was even going to say the creative product, but I think that's part of the problem is the like to be critical of referring to creativity as a product sounds like it's an anti-business approach. And I definitely think that, in order to make a living, you have to treat whatever you make as a business. So it's not that, but it's that I believe that there's intrinsic value in the act of creating beyond just the finished product.
Yeah.
I mean, but the problem is that in music, the product, because musicians have been getting shafted on their record contracts for years, it's definitely switched to where that the only way to make a living is to tour. But then the product, I mean, yes, there's the merch, there's the t-shirts and the posters and all that other stuff, but the product is the physical presence of the person performing for you. And I don't think that we have that equivalent in comics beyond actually having original comic art for people to buy, which as somebody who is experimenting with making comics full-time digital for the first time, like I think very long and hard about that. Like, am I an idiot for trying to make a book without pen and paper? Like, because I mean, I use digital obviously for my gray tones. I use digital for my layouts. But when I was finishing Morningstar, for the last several years, the process has been sketch everything out, get my roughs, and then print them on blue line on Bristol board.
Oh, okay.
And then ink at like full. So it was still like an 11 by 17 sheet of Bristol board, but it's just like the way that professional inkers would get their pencils digitally from the artist, just download them, print them. And I thought, well, that's a lot more efficient way for me to do it because it allows me to move things a lot around in the layout stage. But I just in that step of printing it out and inking it, while I enjoy doing that, I thought there's times when I'd be doing my layouts and I thought it would be so easy to just ink this digitally. It's right here. And see, here's the thing.
Clip Studio Paint, baby.
I do my lettering before I do my layouts.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Because I would find, we all know not to have the character who speaks first on the right side of the panel. We know that.
Yeah.
But a lot of times when you're thumbnailing and you're just kind of dreaming and kind of bringing out your composition, you're doing all that, and then you go to do the page and you find that you've still done that mistake where you don't want to cross tails. You have to do some move the word balloons around. It happens. But I realized that if I do my lettering pass before I do my actual layout. So I do my thumbnails. I do kind of my actual dream storytelling, but then I place my balloons and my dialogue and do all of that, and then draw the actual layouts where I'm putting in my actual characters in their proper costume with their reference and whatever background I have, like what I'm going to ink. Because really, I don't do pencils. I do thumbnails and then layouts and then inks. I kind of skip over actual penciling. But I find that at that lettering stage, then I have the option. I'm like, all right, I laid this out wrong because of the order the characters speak. I'm going to have to change this around. Because I'm both writer and artist, I may look at this and say, I don't care. I love this composition. I'm going to rewrite the page.
Improvise.
An option that you don't necessarily have as a as a collaborative team.
Yeah, I love that part of it. Yeah, I love that part of it. So.
Well, we've gone for almost an hour and a half here, and I want to be respectful of your time. But
I can talk to you all afternoon, Jeremy.
I know. This is one of those things where I definitely think now that we've done this, we're definitely gonna have to do it again in the future.
Sure.
And you, anytime that you, whether
I would invite you on mine, but you're sleeping. So.
I'm a lazy bum. I like to sleep.
East Coast, West Coast thing. So.
But no, if there's ever a time that we can work it out, I would love to be on your channel. And whether you have in the future, whether you have something new that you want to launch, or if you just feel like coming on just to shoot the shit, you're always welcome.
Thanks,
so I'm glad that we could finally sit down and have this conversation and look forward to having more with you.
Yeah, awesome.
So let me see. At the beginning of the stream, I posted your website in the chat, and I'm going to post it again. But it's just paulpate.com, and I'm going to throw this up here on the screen for everybody. So if you go to Paul's website, it will have a link to his store, to his Amazon page. You can pick up his Detective Perez novels. It also has a link to his Instagram, which is where he's sharing his current children's book project that he's working on. It's Blue on Blue, correct?
Yep.
Yes. And is there anything else that you want to point people at? And
I want to tell you that the graphic novel there are 200 pages plus, and they're only $6.99. So pick them up on Amazon if you want them. And it's a noir detective story with lots of fun thrown in. My first graphic novel, Detective Perez, Welcome to Rust City, has vampires in it. So it's a noir detective story with vampires in it. The second one's about a serial killer. The third one's about I don't know, cars and motorcycles and Mad Max type stuff. So
it is awesome.
That appeals to you.
They're all a thrill, and I've mostly been reading Autopolis. I'm looking forward to going back and reading the other ones. Before we get out of here, do you want to take a couple of quick? I see some.
I'll try not to give such rambling answers.
Well, I think people come for the rambling, and it's just nice to have someone else ramble instead of me. So we can share the burden. But dude, I'm really enjoying this. So Dylan asks, is there a way to physically measure out guidelines bigger than the smaller finished product? I'm working on my first mini comic. The finished item will be smaller, and I don't know how to measure to do the art. How to measure bigger to do the art. So, do you have any thoughts on that in terms of like going from you already know what your finished small format is to your large size?
I'm not sure if I understand the question, but I got a couple of comments. You're doing a mini comic. I think that's the way to go. To start off, do a mini comic, get that thing done. You look at it, you can be proud of it, and it can encourage you and give you the confidence to move on to what your next thing. I don't know if you feel like that, Jeremy, but I think that's hugely important. As far as the measurements, get out an old comic book and just get out the ruler, and if you're going to draw bigger, which I think is a good idea, right? Mm-hmm. I use digital tools, so but yeah, maybe imagine in your mind the finished product, and get an example of what you want yours to look like, and then figure out how to get there. Isn't that? I don't know if that makes sense or not, Jeremy.
Well, that makes complete sense to me. I am of two minds. There's two ways to approach it. There is making sure that it starts out that it's proportional to standard comic book size, or there's just doing your mini comic and figuring out what's the larger size. So let's say that your mini comic is like going to be, you take a sheet of 8.5 by 11, you fold it in half, and then you fold it in half again. Maybe that's the size. So that would mean that your size would still, it would be, what is that?
Yeah.
Hang on, I was going to say. I'm asking to do
4.25 by 5.5.
4.25 by 5.5. So let's say that's going to be your finished size. Then, if you want to draw it, like you would just take that, and for me, honestly, what I would do is I would just open up like Illustrator or whatever vector program you have. Like whether it's I like Affinity Designer, I use that. Or if you're working free, there's Inkscape. But you just basically take whatever that size is, that 4.25 by 5.5, and you just scale it up until one of them is, like, let's say that you're going to work on an 11 by 17 artboard. You just scale it up and see what's the maximum size that will fit in there. And you probably want to give yourself a minimum of a 1/2 border on either side, like whatever is your widest or tallest.
Yeah.
Like you want to make sure that's within that. But it sounds like if it's going to be a mini comic and it's based on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, then it's just a matter of you might decide instead of doing 11 by 17, you might do it on 11 by 14 Bristol board. Do it on something that's a little bit more letter sized proportion, but you do the same thing where you just scale it up, figure out what your actual panel border, like your overall border of your page is going to be, and you just scale it up proportionally.
Oh, go ahead.
No, well, I was going to say the other thing is that in general, the standard for comics is your overall page is 11 by 17. The actual board art dimensions of your art border before bleed are 10 by 15 within that. So you can just draw on a page like that and then just scale that down. It's not like, for instance, if you were to do that on a mini comic that these fictional dimensions we're talking about, like a 4.25 by 5.5, you would end up with a page that is skinny for that format. So you would end up with a little bit of extra space on the sides. So it's a matter of knowing what size your actual mini comic is going to be at the end. Which
Dylan just commented it's going to be 3.5 by 5.
3.5 by 5. Oh, so like a business card type size.
Yeah, that's an index card kind of.
An index card. Well, then that sounds like standard comic book pages would work normal. The only thing that you would need to do is decide whether you want to draw them that big. Because if you draw them at 11 by 17 and shrink them down, you're going to end up with way too much detail for your page. When you shrink it down, what's going to happen is that your detailed lines are going to disappear. So you normally I don't know if you agree with this, but ideally you kind of want to draw twice up from whatever your final printed size is.
Yeah, I think that's kind of standard, right?
Yeah, that's a standard Illustrator, dimension, so that whatever lines you put in them, if you shrink it down, they'll shrink.
So 7 by 10.
Yeah,
like Dylan's page, which you could do on an 8.5 by 11 page.
Yeah, so you could just get a piece of Bristol that's like, usually they come on 9 by 12 sheets.
Yeah, right.
About roughly the same proportion. So you just figure out what it is proportionally
and
draw.
And then make sure your story has a beginning, a middle, and an end.
And what something else I would recommend is if this is your first mini comic and you haven't done it before, what I recommend is that you do a sample page at that 9 by 12 or 8.5 by 11 size. Do a sample page and shrink it down to the mini comic, so you can see how your work is going to reduce before you draw the whole story. Whether it's an 8-page mini, 16, 12 pages, 16, whatever it's going to be, do one page. Doesn't matter what it is. Isn't that you could just redraw a comic you've already done, or you can even take an existing comic that you want and just draw your version of it. The reason why is because you want to see how your lines are going to reduce, because you may decide, oh, I need to put less detail in here, or, oh, I need to use bolder lines in order to make my page look the way it wants to. It'll give you a chance to make corrections before you draw an entire comic. Believe me, you're going to want to do that.
And then share it with us, because we look forward to seeing it. I love it. I love it to see people develop their storytelling. It's one of the greatest things.
Yes, Dylan says thank you, Paul, and and definitely, yeah. So he definitely is thinking make 7 to 10, 7 by 10 or 8.5 by 11. So in the end, it really just comes down to figuring out what the actual proportions of your page are, and then scaling it up to whatever medium, whatever size board you're going to work on. And let me see, there was one other. Well, before we get to that last question that I saw on there from Sword, I see Amar is in the chat. My buddy Amar. I'm glad he's able to catch us, because usually, he makes all the streams whenever he can, so it's always good to see him. So happy Sunday, Amar. Good to see you too. And so Sword asked one more question in here, which is like, so we're going to go out on this little philosophical question.
Yeah.
So why is the reason why indie artists and writers aren't making as much money as Marvel and DC, especially when they keep telling the same stories?
I think the Sword is talking about Marvel and DC keeps telling the same stories, right?
Yes, yes. He's saying Marvel
Yeah.
and DC are doing the same old thing over and over again. Indie
And they're
comics,
making all the money.
yes, indie where all the new, fresh ideas are from.
Yeah.
Why aren't they making a killing? And I think that's a deep question.
There's my answer.
Well, do you
I
want
feel
me to,
you, Sword. I feel you, man. It's tough.
do you,
I have a thought experiment we should
right.
go through. Imagine, okay, we all drive cars.
Mhm.
You know, we need them. We don't need them, but we buy them. We pay tons of money for cars. Imagine there's people out there that will make cars and give them to you, or you only have to pay $5 for it, so you can't really make a living off of making cars. That wouldn't work, But we all drive cars. We don't need the cars really, but we get them. We're used to having them. It's the same thing with comics. What's up with that? I mean, you're not gonna pay 20, 30,000 for a comic, but I mean, I want to make a living off it, But you don't. That's not how we do it for some reason. It's kind of weird. I don't get it.
Well,
we have this in our life. We don't really need it, but we want it. But we want it for free or close to free. We want the people to make it. You're lucky that you get to make comics. No, I mean, I'm skilled. I got a skill that you want in your life. Why can't I get paid for it? It's just kind of weird. And I'm not all that emphatic about people making a living off of it. To me, it's a strange phenomenon that I don't understand. But I don't know if that's what you're asking, Sword. But I guess what do you think, Jeremy?
Well, I think that it's a complicated question because when you look at the reason why I believe that indie artists aren't making not just a living but aren't thriving, and when I say that, I know that there are many indie artists who have taken their publishing career in their own control, and they're making a thriving living. They're not just getting by; they're making good livings.
Yeah.
But in terms of like the average Joe just making enough money to get by, yeah, most creatives are usually doing some other job on the side. Like I'm a toy designer, that's my day job. People are teachers. They're working in other mediums, working in video games, concept artists, doing storyboard artists, doing a wide variety of other things to supplement the fact that they have this other art form that they love. That's the reason why people make comics. The only reason to make comics is because you love it. No one just goes into it and says, it doesn't mean that you don't want to make money, but there's so many other ways to make money besides making art. The only reason to make comics is because you love comics. But when it comes to Marvel and DC, if a lot of the money that comes into these companies comes from licensing and merchandising. That whole how like they say that the comics industry has been dying for but it used to say comics industry has been dying for 20 years, and people were saying that 20 years ago. So the comic industry has been dying, I guess, for about 40 or 50 years now. Well, hell, let's say that once you got past the 70s, so we're looking at, let's say comics industry has been dying for, let's say, 50 years now.
Yeah.
Or maybe EC might be, that was probably maybe the first time was during the Wortham trials. And I think that was probably the 60s. So you could say the comics industry has been dying for 60 years. There's always something coming to kill comics. And there's something that almost wipes it out. And there's always more people who are like, I love this, I want to make more.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any Marvel. I don't have hardly any Marvel DC, but I got tons of comics because of people like yourself that are just making great stuff. I mean, to me, comics is thriving.
Yeah.
It's just not a lot of money in it.
The problem is that the money doesn't. It's the overhead, it's the infrastructure of these large companies.
Yeah.
And when it comes to smaller publishers, I mean, that's where you see a lot of publishers come out with great initiatives and a great roster of creators, and people always love to hop on to the next new hot thing.
Mm-hmm.
But it's hard to come up with that that Titanic or that James Cameron's Avatar, that one book that's a blockbuster that will help carry and bring people in so the publisher can keep taking bets on new work. I mean, Image Comics, you've seen Image Comics go through multiple revivals over the course of Image Comics. You know, there's the original Image boom. And then once you got past that, there was the boom. There was a boom before Robert Kirkman and Walking Dead. I can't remember what the books were of that era, but I'm thinking of like around the time that Paul Smith was doing a book called Leave It to Chance. And I forget who the writer was. But there was that era of like Ex Machina that came out, like a lot of the Wildstorm stuff right before Wildstorm got sold to DC. There was that boom. Then there was the Walking Dead boom, where there was, Image really.
Walking Dead is such a good comic.
Yeah.
Oh my God, it's so well done.
I still haven't finished it because I read, I think, probably like the first, like I want to say 8 volumes. And then I got to the point where I'd read, like when the TV show started, I didn't run out to read it because I was like, I know it doesn't follow the book 1-to-1, but I was like, I'll wait till they get past where I've read. And then by the time they got past where I'd read, it's like there was so much going on. I was like, I just never got around to finishing it. I do want to finish the comics. Invincible, it's crazy that they're making the TV show for that now, because Invincible was the one book that, to me, like was the best superhero book on the stage.
Really? I haven't read any of it. So.
I still haven't finished that. I got to, I think, up to the Viltrumite War, which is probably like the last third of the series.
Wow.
And then it just got to the point where I was only going to the comic shop like once a month. And I stopped going to comic shops not because I don't love it. Like I was lucky enough living in LA that there's an amazing number of wonderful comic shops. But what would happen is I feel like in wanting to support retailers, I would never walk into a comic book shop and walk out without buying anything. I was just like, these are small retailers. They built the industry. They're like the backbone of the industry that we love. I was always like, I want to go in and buy something. But the problem was, I just didn't have time to read the books that I was buying. At the point where we went from having a stack of unread comics, which a lot of people have, so then I would have a stack of unread trades.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, I'm trying to get my own book out. And so eventually it went from going into comic shops once a month to going every couple of months to like now it's like, maybe once or twice a year I may go into a comic shop, and even then I'll still be like, let me find a book that I've been wanting to read and haven't picked up. Maybe there's something.
I'm going through the same process with Kickstarter. I'm like, I gotta stay off Kickstarter, man.
Well, now it used to be that I was like, all right, I'd back stuff just because my friends were creating it, and I'd get the book. And then I got to the point where I was like, now I've got a bunch of stuff that I haven't been able to read. And I said, well, let me just back them at the PDF level just to read it. Now I've got a ton of PDFs that I haven't had time to read. And now I'm just like, you know what? I'm just going to do like the pledge a couple of bucks and just say, I like this person. I'm pledging just to give them support. And that's I'm like, I don't have time to read the thing. I'm glad you're making it. I want you to keep making more. But I don't have time to read.
I can get behind that. Amar's like dropping bombs here is good stuff here. I wish I could read it, but I think I get the gist of it. You can't have you can't go out and without some marketing. And yeah,
exactly. Amar, and that's one of the reasons I like having Amar on here is because he definitely has a lot of thoughts about how the industry is and how it works. But my larger point in terms of the idea of indie creators versus Marvel and DC, most of the people have a relationship with the characters. They have a relationship with Superman. They have a relationship with Batman. They have a relationship with Wolverine. They have a relationship with Deadpool. And the average reader, some readers are fans and are well-versed in a lot of different artists and writers. But some people are like, I'll read this book And then when a new creative team comes on, they keep reading the book, and they may bitch and moan about the new creators, or they may be happy that the old team sucked and they're looking forward to the new ones, but they're fans of the character.
The character. Gotcha.
Now, for me, when I was in high school, at a certain point I realized, when John Byrne moved from West Coast Avengers to Next Man, I was like, well, the people that are doing West Coast Avengers are still good, but it's John Byrne who's doing the interesting stuff. And then when he moved from that to doing Kirby's Fourth World, I'm like, it's John Byrne that's interesting. And I saw Walt Simonson move from like the very first comic that I got at a comic shop when I moved from spinner racks to comic shops was the very first version of Walt Simonson's Star Slammers. And that right there, it was an indie comic. Yes, it was published by Epic, but it was an indie comic, and I enjoyed that more than I enjoyed Star Wars. and it taught me early on that for me, I don't follow characters, I follow creators. So I'm not pro Marvel or DC. I'm not anti Marvel or DC.
Yeah.
If Howard Chaykin, if Frank Miller goes and comes back to Marvel and says, I'm going to do a new Daredevil story, because obviously he came back and revisited Batman again. If he were to come back and do more Daredevil stuff, I'd go read that because it's Frank Miller. And if Frank Miller goes back and does more Batman, I'll read that. If Frank Miller, like he has the new Ronin book they did with Philip Tan, I haven't picked it up because they're intentionally not doing digital, and most of the time I actually am checking out digital copies from my library. That's how I get most of my comics these days. But point being is that they were like, we're going to do it serialized. And I don't know if they've put out a trade yet, but for me, it's about someone who I like putting out an interesting story, and whether they do it through Kickstarter, whether they do it just publishing indie, whether they do it through Marvel or DC, I'm more interested in following that. And I don't think that that's the mentality that the majority of consumers of comics have.
Right. Yeah. I think they're more interested in the character, the storyline of Batman or Spider-Man or whatever case.
The thing is, it's rare for an indie creator to have both have an idea that resonates with fans and have the longevity of putting it out long enough for people to develop that kind of relationship with an indie property. Case in point, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. That's for the longest time, that's been the gold standard of indie comics, and it continues to be. And it's gone through periods where it's been, in the forefront. And there's times where it's just been sort of like publishing and it's kind of chugging along in the background. But every few years, someone makes a new movie of it, or there's a new animated series, or there's a series.
I mean, that's like, what is your plan to make a living? I'm going to win the lotto.
How do you make $1 million in comics? It's like start with 10 million. It's very much like
that's I've heard that.
But that's the thing. I think it really, in order to understand it, you really have to, and this is the trouble, is because I understand this, but I don't do it, which is you really need to step back from creativity 100% and simply say, what are the demands of the market and how can I serve them? And when you serve them, you have to serve them something that you believe in. So it's not just saying, what does the market want? They want, they want capes and tights and big boobs, because you can give them that and it might get someone to buy the first issue. But if the story isn't there, and if the art and story doesn't resonate, if it doesn't have, intention put behind it, and it's not well thought out, you may, just because you get someone to pick up the first issue doesn't mean they're going to pick up any more. And they may just pick up the first issue and put it back on the shelf. And that is the hard thing, is most of us, myself included, sit down and say, I have a dream, I have a vision for a tale, and I'm going to tell this tale. Instead of starting with the needs of the market, and like Amar says, and say, and how do I market the act of verb? How do I market this idea to retailers, to people on Kickstarter? Am I going to start out by building word of mouth as a webcomic? Starting out and really looking at it just in terms of if you forget about making comics whatsoever and say, how am I going to build a business? And then you build the infrastructure, and then you make the story and the comics and the art to fulfill that. That's how you have a fighting chance. That's not even how you win. That's just how you have a fighting chance. And I can honestly admit, these are all things that I know, and I pay attention to people who do these things and do podcasts about these things and do YouTube channels about these things, about the business side of creativity. I listen to all of this information. But when it goes back to the mental health, for me, there's times when I'm like, I'm tired. And I'm like, I just want to sit down at my drawing board or at my iPad, and I just want to draw something that's cool.
Yeah.
I want to make something that's kick-ass. And it's
I mean, I'm completely comfortable with the fact that I'm not interested in doing that. I mean, I like hearing about people. I like seeing people succeed. I just don't have it within me to do that. What I do have is a passion for this story, a passion for the comics, a passion for the process. Fulfilling my passions. You know, that's what I got for you. You know, if that's what you're interested in. But
yeah, well, I mean that I knew
not everybody's. You know, these guys that the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle guys.
Yeah, I mean, well, again, there's people who the person who comes out and just makes something cool and it blows up. That does happen. It's not like it's reasonable for that, but you can't build a career on luck. You can prepare yourself so that when luck presents itself, that whole thing of like luck is when opportunity meets preparation. You can build yourself so you're ready when you have an opportunity to take advantage of it. But you can't simply say, I'm just going to make the thing I'm passionate about and hope it finds an audience and expect that you're going to be the one in the million.
Right. You're going to be disappointed in that. Set yourself up for disappointment. Yeah. That's what I learned over the years of finishing these books. It's like just because I put this out there doesn't mean that I'm now famous for it. Nobody cares. The world doesn't need the world doesn't need it. But I have the passion to put it out there and hopefully connect with some people.
Well, I think that what it is that you're building a backlist, and whether you move, you technically you have a trilogy of books. Whether you move on and do another trilogy or whatever it is that you've got coming next, the idea is that I think that the strength is in continuing to put out work until you have that thing that does resonate. And when you have that thing, that's the luck. The luck is you can't pick what is the thing you're going to create that's going to capture people's imaginations.
Right.
But when you do put that thing out there, if you've got the pipeline so that when that catches fire, you can both profit from that and then hopefully have other things that people can look at and say, oh, this is just as high quality as the thing that drew me in. However, I just never heard of it because it didn't get out there. And that's the thing where hopefully then you can start building that pipeline of feeding people products that can give you enough income that you're like, all right, I really can put a lot of time towards this.
Yeah.
So that was a lot.
Great conversation. Yeah. Thanks for the questions, Dylan and Sword and Amar. Yeah.
Amar.
I haven't seen Amar in the chat before. I gotta read Amar's knowledge.
Yeah, we're gonna have to. I'm gonna have Amar on for a whole episode just to share his ideas on business because Amar he is a research junkie. If you hear me talking about stuff, like I may have a lot of information about the history of comics and different creators, but Amar has thoughts about how to build things. I'm gonna have him on it. I'm gonna invite him on sometime. We can just talk the business of comics at some point.
That'd be awesome.
Again, Paul, thank you so much for coming on. It was a pleasure to have you, and I'm glad we finally had a chance to sit down for this conversation. I look forward to more of them.
Yeah, likewise. All right, Jeremy. Take care.
Guys. All right, everybody. We're gonna call it a day. You guys know Patreon, newsletter, books on Amazon. We'll wrap this up because we've gone super long. You guys know how things end. That's it for now. Go be creative.